Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. Today we're talking about Elgar'nan, the god of vengeance and chief of the elven pantheon. Now you may have expected me to close out the series with him given his importance. However, the last two we have are Elgar'nan and my personal favorite, Dirthman, the god of secrets. As if I'm going to close out this series with anyone else but him. Series on the elven gods, I mean, not Talking Dragon Age. To start this off, I want to address the fact that his name supposedly translates to Spirit of Vengeance. However, I'm not convinced of that. Nevertheless, I do need to talk about the nature of the Evanuris. There have been a lot of theories, and there's no way I'm going to cover them all. Some say the Evanuris were all abominations, some say only some of them were elves and others were spirits, the list goes on. The only thing I really want to add on this subject is this.
That's not such a terrible thing, is it?
No, I just don't know why your people want to look like that.
So, one way you could interpret this, although is by no means the only way, is that the elves chose their own form back in the days before the Veil, implying they were spirits who made themselves real. I'm not sure that makes sense, because mortals are needed for spirits to do what they do. If all spirits work the way Cole did, I don't think it could have worked because mortals needed to exist in order for him to do anything that he did. I hope I'm explaining that well. It's like the Chant of Light says, spirits weren't doing anything interesting until the Maker created mortals. Yeah, I know the Chant of Light is flawed, but it's not completely false. And that whole deal does line up with what we've been told about spirits thus far. What is possible is that spirits were reflecting animals of the time. Maybe dwarves as well, but we don't know their nature of the time, given that they were all still connected to the Titans. Probably. We also don't know where humans were in all this. They supposedly hadn't migrated to Thedas yet. But did the Fade stretch across the entire planet? There's a lot we don't know, and that's why I didn't want to talk about this, but I felt like I had to. Well, in any event, let's talk about the Codex entry for Elgar'nan, which details the Dalish legend of creation. The short version is that Elgar'nan was born of the sun and the earth. The sun got jealous of how much Elgar'nan loved the earth, so he burned it all to ash. Elgar'nan got real mad about that and threw his father down. But Mythal calmed his anger, and convinced him to put his father back in the sky on the condition it set every day. Then Elgar'nan and his parents remade the world. There's a lot of allegory here, so let's try to break this down. As for burying the sun, it's entirely possible this means the void or deep underground. The Dalish believe Elgar'nan burying the sun is why the dwarves fear the sky. Either way, I can't imagine this is the complete truth. More importantly, if the sun disappeared for any amount of time or was scorching the earth, couldn't the elves of the time have just fixed that? Without the Veil, Soulless explains that they could shape reality. See, that throws everything for a loop. This is very hard to work with because we don't understand the laws of nature in Thedas back then. So moving away from that, here's what I'm coming up with for all this. Elgar'nan was born of the sun and earth. For life to exist on the earth, the sun needs to be there. But if you get too much sun, those things die. I'm thinking this was a major drought. Or else this is a metaphor for the war the Evanuris were once generals in. In which case, going along with my theory that this war was against the old gods, then it makes sense that Elgar'nan buried them underground. Bear in mind the fact that if we're going to say the tales are misinterpreted, we can take them any direction we want. It's like, if you're talking to a liar, you may as well not be talking to anybody. Yes, it's very annoying. Anyway, Mythal's entry does claim Elgar'nan buried the sun within the earth, so that kind of lines up with the old gods. Kind of. The whole burying the sun thing does bring to mind Lusican, the old god of the night. Burying the sun seems like the kind of thing he would do, but well, that's pretty much it. I would also like to mention that Mythal's entry says she put the moon in the sky as a pale reflection of the sun, which is kind of weird because Thedas has 2 moons. Back to Elgar'nan's entry, what this tale does do is illustrate Elgar'nan's temper and Mythal's influence over him. Let's talk about their relationship. We get quite a few tales. One of the most prominent is that of the sinner who belonged to Dirthaman, who took wings at the urging of Ghilan'nain and flew in the shape of the divine. He begged Mythal for protection, but she said no and let Elgar'nan judge him. The way I see it, Mythal represents justice, while Elgar'nan represents vengeance. Two sides of the same coin. Mythal dealt in compassion, Elgar'nan dealt in wrath. It does not say what became of the sinner, just that he was kind of screwed. The next thing is about the Titans. In the Temple of Mythal, we find a song to Elgar'nan about the earth shaking and destroying elven stuff, and the people pleading with him to make it stop. Strike the usurpers with your lightning, and burn the ground under your gaze. Burning the ground wouldn't stop the Titans unless they intended to melt it. Using lightning against usurpers? Dwarves coming to the surface, maybe? I mean, the old gods come to mind as potential usurpers, but that doesn't really match with anything else here. Well, I bring this up because in the Deep Roads during Trespasser, we find that the people credit Mythal for defeating the Titans, or at least one. Although in the Shattered Library we find this. This explains that a monument was made in a single afternoon by 1,000 toiling servants swarming over a lump of fallen stone as large as a collapsed mountain. By the end of the day, the stern figure of Elgar'nan stares down into a valley carved from the foothills of the rock. The Titans are repeatedly mentioned as either being mountains or being the size of mountains. So basically he made a statue of himself out of a dead Titan. Not much more to say on that. Okay, we've been all over the place. Let's recap. Elgar'nan is credited for fighting the sun after the sun scorched the earth. He allegedly buried the sun within the earth, which kind of sounds like the old gods. However, Mythal then convinced him to let his father out of his prison on the condition it returned to the earth every night. Now, I don't know, guys. I'm really trying. The early elves may have been spirits who made themselves real, but basically everything about the ancient elves is confusing and weird. Elgar'nan was a very vengeful individual. The elves were afraid of him, and it seems rightly so. Some would say he held the power of the sun in the palm of his hand. Honestly, I'm a little disappointed with the lack of information on him specifically. As you may have noticed, most of what we covered here was more about myths of creation and forgotten wars. Not much on Elgar'nan himself beyond wrath. I'm sticking with my theory on the elven gods fighting the old gods back in the day and then fighting the Titans later. I do think it is impressively egotistical to make a statue of yourself out of a dead enemy. There's something I admire about that level of pride. So I guess that about wraps this up. Next episode is about the enigmatic god of secrets. So that's it for now, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to comment and like, and remember, Tala Nadas.